Time to convert the industries of peace into war. Time to make ships, merchant ships and warships. Time to make planes and more planes, bombers and fighters, faster, more powerful than any the world had ever seen. Time to make guns and more guns, shells and more shells, tanks and more tanks.
And it was time to make torpedoes, and nearly 19,000 were produced, right in Forest Park. The story begins even before the attacks on Pearl Harbor. Germany had invaded Poland, and America was on the defensive. President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued a declaration on September 8, 1939, that called for the strengthening of America's national defenses. In 1940, the Secretary of the Navy picked Chicago as the site best suited for a naval production facility to carry out FDR's declaration. At the time, an 80-acre site on Forest Park's aptly named Roosevelt Road was occupied by an 18-hole golf course. The site had originally housed the Harlem Racetrack, which opened in 1893. Out of 5 sites in the Chicagoland area, the government decided this was the most desired site for the new facility. The American Can Company was then selected to construct and manage a new 146,000 square foot Naval Ordnance Plant. To administer contracts, it formed the subsidiary of the Amertorp Corporation. By the start of 1942, America was officially in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters of the Second World War.
With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
And plans for the plant were sped up. The construction project broke ground in February 1942. Just 2 weeks later, the size of the plant was doubled. It opened 8 months later, with a reception on October 29, 1942. The plant had a big mission: produce Mark 13 torpedoes. The torpedoes were nearly 13.5 feet long and almost 2 feet in diameter. Each torpedo weighed 1 ton, and 290 of them were planned to be produced each month. By late 1943, at least 6,000 personnel, men and women, operated the plant and excelled at meeting the production demands. It was also notable for the number of handicapped workers it employed, many of them blinded or wheelchair-bound vets. They all contributed to the maintenance, production, and administrative work. And the plant was acknowledged for its production quality. A telegram from the Navy's Rear Admiral J.F. Hussey Jr. exclaimed, "Torpedoes Mark 13 made by the men and women of NOP Forest Park took a heavy toll of the enemy when they were dropped by U.S. Navy airmen in a strike on Manila Bay, island of Luzon, Philippines." Pilots were enthusiastic in their praise of the performance of Forest Park torpedoes. The plant was even awarded the Army-Navy E Award for outstanding production of war material. And then in 1944, the plant shifted focus to the production of the Mark 15 torpedo. Weighing in at nearly 1 ton bigger and 11 feet longer than its predecessor, the Mark 15 was the military's response to the poorer-than-expected performance of the Mark 13. Long gone were the easy days of producing merely 300 units of 2,000-pound Mark 13 torpedoes. The plant now had to produce almost 400 units of the 3,800-pound Mark 15. A daunting task, but the war was entering its final chapter, and the quotas slowly decreased into the summer of 1945. With Japan's surrender in August, the war was won. Celebration ensued, but so did a reduction in production and mass layoffs. Amertorp moved on from a wartime production plant and focused solely on manufacturing new torpedoes, spare parts, and torpedo storage. For the next 20 years, the plant's production quotas were drastically reduced, but torpedo production was a symbol of the community, exemplified by the village's decision to select a torpedo design as its vehicle tag image. And despite the end of the war, employment continued for thousands of people. Most notable was the father of the last man to walk on the moon, Lieutenant Gene Cernan. His father was a supervisor of the plant while Gene attended Proviso High School. Finally, in 1970, the Department of Defense decided to close the plant nearly 30 years after it opened. In 1977, the facility was decommissioned and ownership was transferred to the village of Forest Park. The land materialized into commercial properties, including the Forest Park Mall, and continues to be redeveloped in the 2020s. For a large part of its history, the details and accomplishments of the plant during wartime were never heavily publicized. During the war, the plant was guarded 24/7 by armed security. Only after its decommissioning did its significance emerge publicly. When called upon in time of need, Forest Park was just one of the many towns that pitched in during the era of wartime production.